It was just another regular day for most of the passengers boarding Flight 482, a mid-morning flight heading across the country. The airport was bustling with activity, families saying their goodbyes, business travelers rushing through security, and flight attendants checking their lists and going over final instructions. Among all this movement, most people were focused on their own world. Some were checking their phones, others sipping coffee, and a few were trying to grab a quick bite before boarding. No one could have predicted that this ordinary flight would become the center of a story that would go viral across social media. Seated quietly among the passengers was a woman who, to most onlookers, seemed just like any other traveler. She had a calm, composed demeanor and wore simple clothing, carrying a small bag by her side. But unlike the rest of the passengers, she held a position of enormous influence. She was the CEO and owner of the very airline this flight belonged to. She was someone who had spent years building her company from the ground up, turning a small regional airline into a respected brand known for safety, service, and innovation. She had become a symbol of success, especially for women and people of color in industries traditionally dominated by men. Yet today, she was incognito, wanting nothing more than a peaceful flight, away from cameras, fans, and public attention. As the passengers settled into their seats, the flight attendants went through their usual checks, ensuring everything from safety instructions to passenger comfort. Among them was a young flight attendant, relatively new to this route and still learning the ins and outs of customer service at high standards. She was energetic, confident, and proud of her role in keeping flights safe and orderly. However, she was also feeling the pressure of a long day filled with demanding passengers and strict schedules. She didn't know it yet, but her day was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would not only test her professionalism but also make headlines. The CEO, sitting quietly in her seat, observed the cabin with a practiced eye. She had flown countless times before, often without any fuss. She knew how passengers behaved, the patterns of service, and even the subtle signals of flight attendants when a situation was about to get tense. But today, she was just another passenger in the eyes of the crew, a person to be treated like any other. She smiled politely at the flight attendants who passed by, trying to keep her presence unobtrusive, hoping that everything would go smoothly. The atmosphere in the cabin was calm but filled with the usual hum of activity, overhead bins clicking, passengers adjusting their seats, and the low murmur of conversation. Children were fidgeting, a few people were reading or watching videos, and some were quietly chatting with neighbors. Everything seemed ordinary, almost predictable. But life has a way of turning ordinary moments into unforgettable experiences, and sometimes, it's the smallest misunderstandings that create the biggest stories. As the flight prepared for takeoff, the CEO's phone buzzed quietly with a few messages from her team. She glanced at them briefly, responding with calm efficiency, all while keeping her focus on the boarding process. Meanwhile, the young flight attendant was moving through the aisles, checking tickets, offering assistance, and trying to maintain the perfect balance of authority and friendliness. She didn't notice the subtle cues of recognition that some passengers gave when they saw the CEO, who looked completely ordinary to most people. The stage was set for what would soon become a dramatic encounter, though no one could see it coming yet. Passengers continued to settle in, unaware that history was about to be made inside the cabin. The CEO remained calm, hoping for a peaceful flight, while the flight attendant went about her duties, confident in her authority but unaware of the identity of the woman seated just a few rows ahead. It was a situation that could have remained perfectly normal, except that human emotions, frustration, misunderstanding, and pride, were quietly brewing under the surface. In this ordinary setting, a plane ready for departure, passengers quietly chatting, flight attendants ensuring everything was in order, no one could predict that a simple misunderstanding would turn into a shocking incident that would spread across the internet. The ordinary flight was about to become extraordinary, and the quiet, composed woman sitting in her seat was about to be at the center of a story that no one would forget anytime soon. The tension, the unknown, and the impending drama were all invisible at this moment, but they were quietly building, ready to explode in a way that would captivate the world. This was just the beginning, the calm before the storm, where an ordinary flight transformed into the setting for a remarkable and unforgettable encounter. The CEO, hoping for a smooth journey, had no idea that the flight attendant's actions moments later would turn her day, and the airline story, into a viral sensation. The ordinary had set the stage for the extraordinary, and the passengers, the crew, and the CEO were all about to witness it unfold in ways they could never have imagined. The flight had barely begun when the subtle tensions of an ordinary airline cabin started to emerge. The plane, a sleek model known for comfort and reliability, hummed quietly as passengers adjusted their seats, buckled in, and prepared for takeoff. The overhead compartments clicked shut one by one, a symphony of small sounds that marked the beginning of what everyone expected to be a routine journey. Yet beneath this calm surface, the atmosphere was already charged with the invisible pressures of hierarchy, responsibility, and human expectation. The flight attendant, a young woman in her early 20s, moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, a bright smile plastered on her face as she greeted passengers and offered assistance. She was proud of her role and carried herself with the confidence of someone determined to do her job perfectly. But inside, she was grappling with nerves, the subtle weight of responsibility, and the silent judgments that sometimes came from passengers. Each interaction, no matter how small, mattered. A simple misstep could be noticed, remembered, and whispered about. As she approached the front of the cabin, her eyes briefly scanned the passengers, noting the families, the solo travelers, and the occasional businessperson buried in their laptops. That's when she saw the woman seated a few rows back. There was something about her, a quiet air of authority, the way she held herself, calm and collected, that immediately caught the flight attendant's attention. Without realizing who this woman truly was, a mix of curiosity and pride stirred inside her. She had been trained to maintain control, to assert authority when necessary, and in her mind, she knew this passenger would need to follow the rules like everyone else. Meanwhile, the CEO sat quietly, observing the cabin without drawing attention to herself. She had learned long ago the importance of blending in, especially during her travels. Public recognition could bring both admiration and unnecessary complications. On this flight, she simply wanted a smooth, uneventful journey. Her posture was relaxed, her gaze calm, yet her mind was alert, subtly analyzing the environment around her, the movements of the attendants, the energy of the passengers, and the potential for minor conflicts that often arise in the confined space of an airplane. It was in this seemingly mundane setting that the stage was set for a clash neither party expected. The flight attendant, carrying the combined weight of authority and inexperience, interpreted minor gestures and questions from passengers as challenges to her control. Every request, no matter how polite, felt like a test of her competence. Meanwhile, the CEO, with years of leadership and experience in navigating high-pressure situations, remained calm and composed, unaware of the storm brewing just a few rows ahead. As the plane began taxiing, small moments of friction appeared. A request for an adjustment in seating, a question about a meal preference, and a minor disagreement over overhead space, each interaction seemed trivial to the average observer. But in the confined, high-stakes environment of a flight, they built layer upon layer of tension. The flight attendant's pride, combined with a slight misunderstanding of the CEO's demeanor, started to form the perfect storm for what would soon become a dramatic confrontation. Passengers continued to chat quietly, oblivious to the brewing tension. Some noticed the flight attendant's slightly sharper tone, others the subtle exchange of glances between the two women, but no one could predict what would happen next. The cabin was a mix of ordinary sounds, seatbelts clicking, rolling suitcases, the low hum of conversation, but under the surface, human emotions were simmering. Curiosity, pride, frustration, and authority were quietly colliding, waiting for a spark to ignite the situation. The CEO remained observant, noticing the flight attendant's energy and the slightly rigid tone in her voice. She could sense the tension building but had no reason to anticipate what would come next. It was a moment of normalcy hiding extraordinary potential, an ordinary flight cabin, ordinary passengers, and an ordinary crew member, all unknowingly on the brink of a situation that would soon capture global attention. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the tension had become palpable, though still invisible to most passengers. Small actions, tiny gestures, and subtle words had all contributed to the growing friction. The flight attendant, confident in her role but unaware of who she was confronting, was about to make a decision that would change the flight from a routine journey into a viral sensation. And the CEO, composed and dignified, was about to face an unexpected test of patience, authority, and grace, all in front of dozens of unaware passengers. What had started as a routine, uneventful flight had now transformed into a charged environment where pride, misunderstanding, and authority were quietly colliding. The ordinary had begun to unravel, setting the stage for a confrontation that no one aboard the plane, or anywhere online, would soon forget. The plane had reached cruising altitude, the engines now producing a steady, calming hum that usually signals the beginning of a smooth flight. Most passengers had settled in, some watching movies, some scrolling on their phones, and some quietly chatting with their neighbors. But for the two women at the center of this story, the tension that had been quietly building was about to erupt. The flight attendant, moving down the aisle for the third time, was feeling a mix of confidence and stress. She had always taken pride in maintaining order, ensuring passengers followed instructions, and providing assistance when needed. But as the flight progressed, small irritations had begun to accumulate. A spilled drink earlier, a delayed response from another passenger, and minor complaints from the cabin had all added to her sense of urgency to assert control. To her, this was a flight she needed to manage perfectly. Then she reached the row where the CEO was seated. A request had been made, simple, polite, nothing out of the ordinary, but to the flight attendant, it felt like a challenge to her authority. The CEO had asked for a slight adjustment in her seat position and inquired about the availability of a certain meal. Nothing provocative, nothing disrespectful. But in the tense environment of the cabin, where authority and compliance are constantly tested, the flight attendant interpreted it differently. In her mind, this passenger was testing her, questioning her ability to maintain order. Her voice, calm at first, began to edge into sharpness. She explained the airline's rules and tried to assert control over the situation. But the CEO, polite and composed, responded with a measured tone, politely insisting on her request. To any observer, it was a minor disagreement that could have been resolved with a simple apology or adjustment. But in the confined space of the airplane cabin, with both pride and professional identity on the line, it quickly escalated. Passengers began to notice the subtle tension. A few glanced up from their screens, sensing the rising conflict but unsure whether it was serious. The cabin had gone from a background of ordinary conversation to a quiet stage for a confrontation that would soon dominate attention. The flight attendant, frustrated and unaware of who she was dealing with, felt her control slipping. Her frustration mixed with pride, and suddenly, what started as a minor issue transformed into a battle for authority. The CEO, calm and composed, had no intention of escalating the situation. Years of leadership had taught her how to handle conflicts with grace. She remained polite, explaining her needs clearly but without raising her voice. Her tone was firm yet respectful, a combination that most people would interpret as professional and controlled. But the flight attendant, blinded by her own stress and the invisible pressures of the moment, saw this composure as defiance, as a challenge that needed to be addressed immediately. What followed next was almost inevitable. The flight attendant leaned forward slightly, speaking more forcefully, trying to command attention from not just the CEO but nearby passengers. Her words, meant to enforce authority, carried an edge that drew the gaze of the surrounding travelers. Eyes turned, curiosity sparked, and the ordinary flight cabin began to feel smaller, almost charged, as everyone instinctively recognized that something unusual was unfolding. The tension reached its peak in a single, shocking instant. In a gesture that seemed impulsive but entirely real, the flight attendant smacked the CEO. The sound was subtle yet audible enough to make heads turn. The cabin, which had been filled with the ordinary hum of flight life, froze. Passengers gasped, some covering their mouths in disbelief, others immediately pulling out their phones to record the event. The unexpected act of physical confrontation in such a confined and professional space sent shockwaves through the plane. For a few frozen seconds, time seemed to stop. The CEO, stunned but composed, instinctively raised her hand, not in retaliation, but as a signal for calm. The flight attendant, suddenly realizing the gravity of her actions, froze. Her eyes widened, and the weight of what she had done started to sink in. The moment was electric. An ordinary flight had been transformed into a real-life drama unfolding in front of dozens of witnesses, each silently questioning what had just happened. In those moments, the dynamics of power shifted dramatically. The CEO, once a quiet passenger trying to blend in, now stood at the center of attention, not because she sought it, but because she commanded it naturally. The flight attendant, previously confident and authoritative, now faced the immediate consequences of her impulsive action. The ordinary boundaries of airline etiquette had been shattered, replaced by a high-tension drama that would not only define this flight but also capture the attention of viewers around the world once shared online. This was the turning point, the moment where a simple misunderstanding escalated into a confrontation that would be remembered and replayed countless times. What began as a routine flight had become the setting for a remarkable story of pride, authority, and the unpredictable consequences of human behavior under pressure. The conflict had begun, and the cabin, and the world, was about to witness how it would unfold next. The moment hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. What had started as a minor disagreement between a passenger and a flight attendant now escalated into something far more intense. The cabin, which had been buzzing quietly with the usual hum of engines and soft conversations, fell into a tense, almost electric silence. Everyone on board instinctively sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding, even if they didn't fully understand the stakes. The flight attendant, already overwhelmed by stress and her sense of authority being questioned, felt a surge of frustration she could no longer control. Her heart raced, and her mind, clouded by a mix of pride and anger, pushed her toward a decision that would change everything. She had never imagined herself in a situation where professional protocol collided with personal emotion so violently, yet in that split second, logic gave way to impulse. Then it happened. In a sudden motion that shocked everyone, she smacked the CEO. The action was swift, almost reflexive, but the impact was undeniable. A soft yet startling sound echoed across the aisle, drawing the immediate attention of nearby passengers. People froze in disbelief, eyes widening, some instinctively gasping, while others instinctively reached for their phones. Within seconds, the ordinary routine of a flight transformed into a scene of pure drama. The CEO, initially stunned, felt a mix of surprise and incredulity. Years of navigating high-pressure situations had prepared her for crises in boardrooms, negotiations, and public events, but never for this. Here she was, a leader accustomed to control and respect, struck unexpectedly by someone she didn't even know personally, in front of dozens of strangers. Her shock was visible, yet beneath it lay a reservoir of composure she had cultivated over a lifetime of professional challenges. Passengers reacted in a flurry of whispers, murmurs, and exclamations. Some were frozen, unsure whether to intervene, while others began capturing the moment on their phones, recognizing instinctively that this was a story unlike any they had witnessed in the skies before. The cabin, once a place of calm routine, now resembled a small theater, with all eyes drawn to the unexpected act. Each passenger experienced a mix of disbelief, curiosity, and a silent acknowledgement of the tension between authority and accountability. The flight attendant, meanwhile, suddenly realized the magnitude of what she had done. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening slightly, as the weight of the moment hit her. For the first time, she recognized the enormity of the mistake she had just made, not just professionally, but personally. The respect she had assumed was due now seemed fragile, and the realization that she might have crossed a line began to sink in. Yet even in the midst of this shocking confrontation, the CEO maintained her poise. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand, not in anger or retaliation, but as a gesture to calm the room and reassert a sense of order. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and measured, carrying an authority that demanded respect without aggression. She reminded the flight attendant, quietly but firmly, of who she was, not to humiliate, but to correct and regain control of the situation. The shift was immediate. The power dynamic, which had felt uncertain moments before, now clearly favored the CEO, yet without descending into chaos. Passengers watched, riveted, as the scene unfolded. Some whispered to each other, speculating about what had just happened, while others continued recording, knowing they were witnessing a moment that would soon become a viral story. The plane, suspended high above the ground, had become the stage for a dramatic collision of ego, authority, and unexpected human behavior. In that instant, the ordinary transformed into the extraordinary. The simple act of a slap, brief, shocking, and impulsive, had turned a routine flight into a story of global fascination. It highlighted not only the fragility of authority under pressure but also the unpredictable consequences of actions taken in the heat of the moment. What might have seemed like a fleeting incident would soon ripple outward, capturing the attention of passengers, airline staff, and eventually the world. The shocking moment passed, but its echoes lingered. The air in the cabin seemed heavier, charged with tension and anticipation. Every eye, every subtle movement, every quiet breath held meaning. The ordinary rules of flight etiquette had been disrupted, replaced by an unspoken understanding that this was no longer just a routine journey. The consequences, both immediate and long-term, were about to unfold, and every person on board would remember exactly where they were when it happened. The courtroom, which had been tense for hours, frozen, now seemed to hold its passengers' eyes darted almost between the flight attendant and the CEO. The detective, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent, had spent the morning the shock of what had just happened to humiliate the judge. The sudden break from ordinary flight decorum, his sarcastic remarks, in the air, and his condescending tone had all been whispered to each other's unwavering composure, while others quietly began recording, to dominate the courtroom, knowing they highlighted his own extraordinary. Now, in that tense moment, shift all attention was on the CEO, one that no one could ignore. How she would respond could either escalate the situation or diffuse it. Paused for a moment. The CEO, initially stunned by the unexpected strike, calm but took a slow, sweeping across the courtroom with a quiet intensity. She had spent years in high-pressure boardrooms, every person present negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, as if time managing crises that would shake even the most confident leaders, who had been used to controlling every situation. Prepared her for this. Suddenly realized that the balance of power from someone whose face she had never even seen before. He was no longer the center of attention in dozens of strangers on a plane. He was under scrutiny. She could feel the eyes of the passengers never experienced, some expecting anger, some expecting in a voice that was both steady and commanding. Retaliation. The judge spoke a sentence that cut through the response was of lightning. Calm, she announced that the detective was to be arrested without contempt of court. She lifted her hand slightly. The words not as a gesture of retaliation and precise, but as a subtle signal to both the flight attendant and the cabin that she intended to handle the situation with dignity. It was the kind of silence that made every person in the room pause mid-breath. She addressed the flight attendant directly when the unexpected meets absolute accusation. The detective's was carefully chosen, measured, for the first time, carrying the authority of someone who knew their position yet did not need to assert dominance, as if searching for words, but none came. You need to calm down and think about your actions. Thinking she said, intimidate, her tone humiliate, but not dominate. Do you understand? He found himself powerless, caught in the judge's carefully measured immense weight. The courtroom watched in awe as the man who had tried so hard to humiliate the judge realized she was no longer in control. The spectators leaned forward, and quiet authority emanating from the CEO shifted the power dynamic capturing every moment, while journalists whispered urgently to one another, realizing they were witnessing anger or confrontation, but through calmness and presence. Filled with people who had come out of curiosity or concern, their fascination silent, absorbing the gravity of what had just happened about the CEO's poise. It was rare for others quietly even speculated about the incident to be held accountable so publicly. Phones continued and rarer still for a judge not just the slap, control, the reaction that dignity rather than the reaction that transformed a shocking incident into a lesson quietly along the sides of the courtroom. The CEO's calmness made it clear that impulsive actions could have consequences with precision, and that authority rooted in professional and professionalism far outweighed. There was no chaos, no shouting. The flight attendant's of order asserting itself over arrogance, embarrassment, and the dawning realization. For all his previous bluster, she opened her mouth, no resistance, perhaps to speak, perhaps he to had apologize, no words, no arguments, no steady gaze and unwavering just the realization that his behavior had finally crossed a line of reckoning. Not come back the reality of her actions. The audience could feel the power of the moment. The consequences written not just in the CEO's one man being arrested, but in the silent it was about just passengers surrounding them, and authority being upheld in a tense environment. The CEO remained composed. The judge's calm decisiveness had transformed an intense confrontation into a teaching moment, signaling that one that showed would not disrupt her focus or ruin her flight. Power and privilege do not excuse misconduct. She had learned over the years that confrontations, even outside the public ones, the scene began to ripple through social media and news outlets. And clarity. Clips of the moment the judge commanded the arrest went viral slowly began to absorb this calm, realizing that the moment of drama had reached its peak and inspired by the judge's ability to maintain composure while asserting authority. Her response was more than just personal dignity online about it was a demonstration of leadership under pressure and the importance of respect. She did not retaliate, power, yell, or humiliate. This was no longer just a local courtroom drama. Instead, it had become a modeled how authority and a story that people would share for years to come. Chaotic, potentially viral incident into a lesson in being led away, still stunned, the flight attendant, silent, who had acted impulsively. The courtroom seemed to face the immediate reality of accountability that had been building for hours had finally found the power of calm confidence. And yet, it was by the time the moment born of anger or the entire cabin seemed to exhale collective authority, calm, and the undeniable assertion of justice herself, but had done so in a way that left her no doubt about her position, her posture and metaphorically, her voice ready to continue proceedings as if nothing had happened. Confrontation, everyone knew that something extraordinary had just occurred under pressure. The turning passengers would remember this moment, not just because of the slap attempt had not only how it had been handled, but it had also resulted in a dramatic reversal of power. The ordinary flight had transformed into an extraordinary line between arrogance and accountability, intelligence, and in that dignity could neutralize aggression, truly fall, and that power is most effective silence when wielded with restraint rather than realization. Everyone knew that reaction had been shifted the story and the judge's calm, creating decisive action would be remembered far longer than the detective's moment of bluster ever could, offline alike. The cabin, which had only moments ago been filled with quiet murmurs and the low hum of the airplane's engines, now felt electric. Passengers sat frozen in their seats, some staring wide-eyed at the scene that had just unfolded, others whispering frantically to those nearby. Phones were out, cameras recording, fingers trembling slightly as people captured every detail. The slap had been shocking enough, but the CEO's calm, composed response added another layer to the drama, leaving everyone in awe. Whispers and gasps rippled through the cabin like a wave. "Did you see that?" someone murmured to their neighbor. She just slapped her." Another passenger shook their head in disbelief, muttering, "I've never seen anything like this on a flight." The atmosphere was thick with curiosity, tension, and the thrill of witnessing a moment that was anything but ordinary. Some passengers instinctively started recording the incident, their phones pointed discreetly yet deliberately at the unfolding drama. Social media-savvy travelers whispered to one another about how this would go viral. A few even speculated about the identities of the two women involved, noticing the CEO's calm authority and the flight attendant's shocked expression. Others, however, simply watched in stunned silence, unable to tear their eyes away from the scene. It was a rare, real-life spectacle, unfolding not on television or in a movie, but in the small, confined space of a commercial airplane. Children nearby sensed the tension too, their quiet observations adding to the intensity. Parents tried to calm them, whispering reassurances, but even they couldn't fully hide their fascination. Passengers' conversations shifted from casual chatter to hushed speculation. Who was this CEO? Why had she been slapped? Would anyone step in? Could this get worse? The questions multiplied, and the collective anticipation filled the cabin like an invisible charge. Meanwhile, some passengers began analyzing the situation from their own perspectives. Business travelers nodded subtly, recognizing the power dynamics at play. Regular flyers exchanged knowing glances, aware of how rare, and dangerous, it was for a confrontation to escalate mid-flight. Every movement of the flight attendant, every gesture of the CEO, and every subtle glance between the two women was being carefully observed and interpreted. It was as if the cabin itself had transformed into a theater, with every passenger an unwilling audience member to a drama they could never have predicted. A few brave passengers considered intervening, debating whether to speak up or stay silent. Some reached for flight attendants, quietly asking if everything was under control, while others debated whether they should approach the young attendant or let the CEO handle it herself. But by now, it was clear, the CEO's calm, authoritative presence had already taken control of the situation. Her composed response had diffused much of the immediate tension, signaling to everyone that chaos was unlikely to ensue further. Even the subtle details did not go unnoticed. The CEO's posture, calm yet upright, conveyed authority without aggression. The flight attendant's hesitant movements revealed regret and embarrassment. Every nuance was being silently analyzed by the passengers, who couldn't help but form judgments and speculations in real time. Some whispered in admiration of the CEO's poise, while others quietly criticized the flight attendant's impulsive reaction. The cabin had become a microcosm of social observation, a space where every action carried amplified meaning. As the flight continued, the whispers began to shift from immediate shock to storytelling. Passengers recounted the incident to those nearby, embellishing details in subtle ways, as humans often do when recounting dramatic events. "Did you see the way she just handled that?" one whispered. "She didn't yell, she didn't scream, she just owned the moment." Phones continued to capture video clips, destined to appear on social media feeds, ensuring that the moment would reach a far wider audience beyond the passengers on board. By now, the cabin had settled into a tense rhythm. While the slap itself had been shocking, the CEO's composed handling of the situation had become the main topic of conversation. Passengers were no longer just reacting to the act of violence, they were analyzing the lessons it presented: authority, dignity, and professionalism in moments of extreme stress. The ordinary flight had transformed into a living case study on human behavior, with dozens of witnesses internalizing and interpreting every action and reaction in real time. The passengers' reactions underscored one undeniable truth: what had occurred was far beyond an ordinary airline incident. It was a moment of spectacle, tension, and education all rolled into one. A seemingly routine flight had become unforgettable, a story passengers would recount for years, long after they disembarked. Every passenger, in their own way, had witnessed history, not the kind written in textbooks, but the kind that spread through whispers, recordings, and eventually, viral fame. The moments following the shocking incident didn't end the drama, they were only the beginning. Once the plane landed and the passengers disembarked, the young flight attendant found herself facing the stark reality of what had just occurred. The adrenaline of the moment had faded, leaving a heavy weight of shame, anxiety, and dread pressing on her. The realization hit hard: she had acted impulsively, publicly, and in front of dozens of witnesses, and the woman she had slapped was no ordinary passenger, but the CEO and owner of the airline itself. Within hours, the incident had already begun to circulate online. Passengers had recorded the shocking moment, and social media platforms erupted with the story. Videos, GIFs, and screenshots spread rapidly, drawing comments, debates, and countless reactions. People were stunned by the audacity of the slap, but just as much by the CEO's remarkable composure. The flight attendant suddenly found herself not just facing professional repercussions but also the intense glare of public scrutiny. The airline acted quickly. Internal investigations were launched to understand the sequence of events and determine accountability. The flight attendant was called in for questioning, where she had to recount her perspective, her intentions, and what led her to cross the line in such an unprofessional manner. Every word, every explanation was weighed against the documented evidence and witness accounts. While the company emphasized fairness, it also made it clear that impulsive actions like hers could not be tolerated. The professional consequences were swift. The flight attendant received a formal reprimand and was temporarily removed from active flight duty. She was required to undergo intensive retraining focused on customer service, professional behavior under stress, conflict resolution, and awareness of hierarchical dynamics within the airline. The company made it clear that while mistakes could be educational, the public nature of this incident had amplified its severity. It was a lesson in accountability that she would never forget. Beyond the immediate professional consequences, there were also personal repercussions. Friends, family, and colleagues had all seen or heard about the incident online. Some offered support, reminding her that everyone makes mistakes, while others were shocked, questioning how such a moment of impulsiveness could happen. The emotional toll was significant. The flight attendant had to grapple with embarrassment, guilt, and the realization that one impulsive decision could overshadow years of hard work and dedication. Meanwhile, the CEO's response continued to shape the narrative. By handling the situation with calm authority, she ensured that the focus of public conversation shifted from anger and retaliation to professionalism and composure. Media outlets, bloggers, and social media commentators praised her handling of the incident, framing it as a lesson in leadership, patience, and grace under pressure. For the flight attendant, this only intensified the feeling of being in the wrong, as the contrast between impulsive action and controlled composure became a vivid public lesson. The incident also sparked conversations within the airline industry and beyond. HR professionals and airline executives analyzed the event as a case study on passenger interactions, employee conduct, and crisis management in high-stress environments. While the flight attendant faced consequences, the airline also used the opportunity to reinforce training protocols, emphasizing communication skills, situational awareness, and the importance of maintaining professionalism no matter the circumstances. Despite the punishment, the incident became a turning point for the flight attendant's career and personal growth. She was forced to reflect deeply on her actions, learning lessons about patience, humility, and the long-reaching effects of impulsive decisions. While the shame was heavy at first, over time she came to understand the value of accountability and the importance of controlling her emotions, even in situations that felt unfair or frustrating. By the end of this chapter in her life, the flight attendant had learned that actions, no matter how brief, carry weight, especially when performed in public or against those in positions of authority. The consequences she faced were not just disciplinary, they were transformative, shaping her approach to her career, interpersonal relationships, and understanding of respect and authority. The incident that had begun as a shocking act of impulsiveness became a defining lesson in professionalism, humility, and the human cost of a momentary lapse in judgment. As the days passed after the shocking incident on Flight 482, the story didn't fade, it grew, spreading across social media, news outlets, and online discussions worldwide. What began as a single impulsive act, a slap from a flight attendant to a passenger, had transformed into a story with lessons far beyond the confines of that airplane cabin. For everyone involved, especially the flight attendant and the CEO, this event became more than just a moment of conflict, it became a moment of reflection, growth, and understanding. The flight attendant, still haunted by the memory of the incident, began to reflect on what had led her to act so impulsively. At first, she focused on the embarrassment, the professional reprimand, and the public scrutiny. But with time, she realized there were deeper lessons embedded in the experience. She understood that in moments of stress or frustration, her actions carried consequences far beyond what she had imagined. One split-second decision could affect not only her career but her reputation, her self-esteem, and the perception of everyone around her. She began to see the importance of pause, reflection, and emotional control, especially in high-pressure environments like an airplane cabin, where small conflicts could escalate quickly. For the CEO, the incident reinforced her understanding of leadership and composure. By responding calmly and with measured authority, she had prevented the situation from spiraling out of control. Her reaction became a textbook example of how power, when exercised with dignity and restraint, can transform a moment of conflict into an opportunity for teaching and influence. She reminded the world, through her actions, that authority isn't about aggression, it's about presence, patience, and the ability to guide situations toward resolution without creating further chaos. The passengers, too, carried lessons from that day. Many spoke about it in interviews, on social media, and in conversations with friends and family. They reflected on the unpredictability of human behavior, the importance of empathy, and the power of composure in tense moments. What could have been an ordinary flight became a living example of how small actions, whether reckless or measured, can ripple outward, affecting everyone in the immediate environment and beyond. For the airline itself, the event became a catalyst for reflection and improvement. Policies were reviewed, training sessions were intensified, and employees were reminded of the importance of professionalism, empathy, and situational awareness. The incident highlighted not only the risks of impulsive behavior but also the opportunities for growth when mistakes are acknowledged and addressed constructively. It became an internal case study, teaching all staff that professionalism, humility, and respect are not just guidelines, they are essential for the safety, comfort, and dignity of everyone on board. Ultimately, the story of the slap on Flight 482 became more than just a viral moment. It became a story about human nature, about pride, authority, stress, and the unpredictable ways people respond under pressure. It illustrated the fragility of composure and the power of emotional intelligence. The flight attendant learned a hard lesson in accountability and restraint, while the CEO demonstrated the quiet strength of leadership and poise. Together, their interactions created a narrative that resonated with audiences far beyond the airplane cabin. As reflections continued, the event evolved into a broader lesson for society. It reminded people that actions have consequences, that respect is earned and maintained through understanding rather than intimidation, and that moments of conflict can serve as opportunities for growth and learning. The story became an example of how impulsive behavior can backfire, how dignity and composure can command respect, and how even the smallest gestures, like remaining calm in the face of provocation, can leave a lasting impression. Years from that day, passengers would still recall the flight, the slap, and the extraordinary reaction that followed. The incident became a symbol of human behavior under pressure and the lessons that emerge when pride and impulsivity collide with authority and calm. It became a story told over and over, not for scandal, but for insight. A story that reminded everyone that life, like that flight, is full of moments where choices matter, and the way we respond can transform challenges into lessons, mistakes into growth, and ordinary days into unforgettable stories. In the end, Flight 482 wasn't just remembered for the slap, it was remembered for what it taught, about restraint, respect, leadership, and the profound impact of composure in a world where impulsive decisions can travel far beyond the moment they occur.